seen him a couple times this year. It's good to have you back in the city, and we're thrilled to have you here as part of this event and looking forward to the discussion today. You all know Trevor, President and General Manager of the Sea Dogs, and Trevor and Brock are going to have a great discussion today that we're looking forward to. So welcome again.
Thank you.
As Mark Anthony said, thank you for coming back. I think it's a third visit to St. John.
Third time in St. John, and it gets prettier and prettier every single time.
Good, that's good. You've come and spoken to our players twice. We haven't had the good fortune of having you speak to. I see people involved with the team, players' parents, mix of folks from the community here. So it's probably a bit of a different conversation than when you're actually right in the locker room. So Brock played Windsor.
Windsor and the Sioux.
In the Sioux.
Yeah.
And then played pro.
Mm-hmm.
And was among the first openly gay male hockey players, correct?
I think I was the first.
The first openly gay male hockey player ever. In the history of, how long ago was this?
I came on 2016.
2016. So in 100 years of hockey, there was one gay hockey player, and we have him here to our right, I guess, eh? Anyways, that's part of the discussion and part of the problem. So we'll dive into that. Maybe tell us about growing up in hockey culture. I think it's important to share that with the audience.
Yeah, I think growing up in the sport, I was the stereotypical Canadian kid. I grew up in a small town in northern Ontario, and I lived down the street from an arena. And every day after school, I'd go to the rink hoping that a team, either the ice was open or a team would show up missing a goalie. And I'd always jump on, and on the weekends, my parents would drop my meals off at the rink. So I was like that stereotype. And I got pretty good at hockey doing that, and before I knew it, I was moving on to junior and to the OHL. And I think around the time I got to the O, I started to really recognize that I was different. What the players were talking about, what was going on, I didn't really resonate with, and I started to struggle with it. Start to struggle with the language I heard in the locker room, at school, hanging out with my friends, and the behaviors, and it made me feel like I couldn't be me and play the sport I love. And as you know, working with players at that age and being thrust into this, spotlight, hockey becomes your identity. And you very much become, I'm Brock McGillis, the hockey player, and everyone you know asks you about hockey whenever they see you. So that's who I was, that's what I knew, so I couldn't be gay. So I hid it. I became the stereotype of what we hear of a hockey player. I'm ashamed to admit this, I was a womanizer. I partied hard, I always had girlfriends, I became the fun guy. What people didn't know is I'd go home at night and cry. I hated myself. Quite honestly, most days I wanted to die, and on more than one occasion when I was in major junior hockey, I tried to. And I didn't think I could be myself and play the sport I love, so I hid it. And in order to hide it, I started drinking daily. From 18 to 23, I drank every day. I did it to suppress who I was. I did it so I wouldn't have to think about being gay. Being depressed, not sleeping, drinking heavily, my career derailed. I went from being on NHL draft lists and supposed to have this linear trajectory to all of a sudden I was having season-ending injuries every year. I was playing in the minors of Europe, and it was troubling. And at that point, I thought, great. I went there, I sat myself down one day and I said, you need to figure this out. I knew two things were about to happen. One, hockey was about to end. It was inevitable. Couldn't keep going down this road and my career take off. And two, and most importantly, I'd probably end up dead. So at the end of that season, I came back, I went to Toronto, and I went on a date with a guy. And I ended up dating him for 3 years. And initially I thought, this is phenomenal. My career's going to get back on track. My life's going to get back on track. Everything's going to go the way it's supposed to because now I've accepted I'm gay. But it got worse because now I was in the closet. And not only was I hiding myself, I was hiding somebody else. I dated somebody for 3 years without a soul in my life knowing. Not a friend, not a family member, not a teammate, nobody. And it was so tough. I mean, even with his friends, we had an alias. So they wouldn't find me on social media, realize I was a professional hockey player and out me. So it got worse. Finally, that relationship ended, and I took a step back from pro hockey and went to Concordia and played on the hockey team there, but focused more on my education at that point.
Hockey culture certainly creates a level of conformity, right? How do we shift that? Like what you experienced there, how does that shift?
So I think there's a few things that made me come out. And I'm going to tell them in a different order than how they happen, just because I think it makes more sense with the question. But a hockey association up north, I'm from Sudbury originally, blackballed me. They found out I was gay, and they wouldn't let my businesses. When I retired from playing, I started working with athletes up there, and I didn't tell any of them I was gay. I was hiding my sexuality from them. I was out at that point in my private life. And a hockey association found out I was gay, and they wouldn't let me. They didn't say this is the reason why, but all of a sudden, my business wasn't allowed to work with their players in season. I played in that association growing up. My brother played in it growing up. My father coached in it for 20 or so years. My brother and I both coached in it. I was coaching in it at that point. I was the only one volunteering my time that had businesses training athletes. And my business was the only one not allowed working with their players. True to form, my father, I knew he'd do this and stand up for me at some point, but he went up to the president and said, "Is it because Brock's gay?" And the president denied knowing. The next day I showed up to a rink. I was coaching a U16 AAA team. I was an assistant coach. And the head coach said, "I no longer need your help, bye." And I'd been working with that team for 5 years. 2 other teams did the same thing. And then shortly after that, there was the incident at Pulse nightclub in Orlando where 49 people were murdered. And the reality for my community is whether we're in St. John or Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver, no matter where we are, for LGBTQ plus people, they still are at risk even walking down the street holding hands, of verbal assaults, of violence, of death. And those spaces, those queer nightclubs are supposed to be safe spaces, and that was ripped away from all of us. But that same year, I got a call from a hockey mom one day. And I'm sure some of you in the stands are, and some of you listening maybe, but hockey parents are a unique breed of human, Trevor. And I'm sure you've experienced a few in your day.
We have some great ones here in the audience, though, so...
Good.
Yeah,
we got the good ones
we
here.
got some good ones here. They're here, so...
When I was working with hockey players, I was training about 100 hockey players daily. That meant at least 100 text messages or phone calls from hockey parents daily. And one day, about 5 years into running my business, I got a call from a hockey mom, and she said, "Brock, I want to set you up on a date." I said, "Oh dear God, no." I said, "What's her name?" And she said, "Steve." I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Brock, you're gay." I'm like, "How do you know this?" She's like, "My son told me." Her son's 15, and she's like, I'm like, "How does he know this?" And she's like, "Oh, all the boys know. They've known for years." So I thought about telling them, and well, initially I panicked and thought they were all going to leave. And then once I got over that fear, I thought about telling them, and then I thought, you know what, no, I'm going to do a little sociology experiment. Because I realized something. They know I'm gay, but they don't know that I know that they know that I'm gay. So I could observe their behaviors like animals in the wild, hockey players in their natural habitat. And I started to recognize that, and I always tried to curb racist, sexist, ableist, and homophobic language with my athletes, and I started to notice, anytime they said something homophobic, they'd freeze up and apologize to me. And I'd sort of shrug and nod and keep going, and then after a while I went, cool, maybe we're creating a shift here. But I really didn't know. They could just be nice to me, they like me, but they could go to school or the rink or on the ice and call kids fags. I had no idea. One day I wasn't there, I had a sprint coach working with some of my athletes, and at the end of a 2-hour workout, he told them they had 10 more 200-meter sprints. And a younger player looked at the sprint coach and said, "This is so gay, I can't believe you're making us do this." And an older player who was already in the OHL looked at the younger player and said, "We don't say that here, give me 50 push-ups." And that became something my athletes adopted amongst themselves. And because hockey players are influencers, they took it to their peers at school, they took it to their teammates, and before I knew it, people I didn't even know were doing push-ups. The younger player, one of his teammates one night was on FaceTime with his girlfriend. And she said, "Let's hang out," and he said, "No, I can't have practice." And she said, "That's okay, you never want to hang out with me." And he looked at her and said, "Give me 50 push-ups right now or we're breaking up." And they both dropped down on FaceTime and did 50 push-ups. And that was the moment I realized we could create shifts in this culture and broader in society and make it a more inclusive, better place for everyone. And that's a long answer to your question, but I think there's different ways we can create shifts, and the way I focus on is 3 tangible ways. First one is to humanize. Everywhere I go speak, at least 95% of the room knows somebody's LGBTQ+. We all know somebody who's BIPOC. We all know somebody who's disabled. We all know people from different minority groups. We need to think about them before we act. We need to think about the impact it would have on them, the way hockey culture made me feel, and so many of my ex-teammates came to me after I came out and said, "I'm sorry." We need to think about our language, our behaviors, our actions, because they have impact or impacting people in our lives. And beyond that, broader society, and we all think we're good people, and we are. We just got to treat others, the same way. The second way is the environment we create. Whether it's a locker room environment, whether it's a corporate environment, whether it's here. We need to create environments that people feel good, the way we feel. I always tell people, if you can walk into a room and you feel really good in that room, everyone should be able to feel that way in that room. And we need to get to the point in society where everyone does. We need to get to the point in hockey where women working in the sport can walk into the locker room and feel comfortable. Where LGBTQ+ people, where the black hockey player can walk in and feel comfortable. We're not there yet, but we need to do that. And I think one of the easiest ways is through the language we use. And there's different forms of language: direct, indirect, laughter, body language, and silence. And I think silence is critical because in today's society, it's not good enough to stay silent on issues with our teammates, with our peers, with our friends, with our employees, employers, and enable behaviors. We need to use our voice. That's how we'll create shifts. And ultimately, that's what that one hockey player did in Sudbury, Ontario, that led to 6 years later, I'm sitting on a stage with you. And the third way is through conformity. We all conform in some way. The way we dress, the way we talk, the way we act is to our environment. And we need to break down those barriers. I have a saying I say everywhere I go speak, and whether people are pro-LGBTQ+ or not, I ask them, please remember this: normal doesn't exist. It's fake, it's fallacy, it's an illusion. All of you look around this room, you have different hair color, eye color, skin color, body shapes and sizes. Normal doesn't exist. We're all thinking different things at this exact same moment. All of us, we're all a bunch of weirdos. And that's a beautiful thing. And the sooner we embrace that, the less likely we will be to judge others for their weirdness.
I think when we first came to St. John, when we first become friends, good friends since, I remember a player's parent, and not the parents here, because not the ones in the crowd tonight or today, but the concern that, okay, Brock's, this person's coming to speak about being a gay hockey player, I don't know if I want my son to be a part of this, because then he might become gay. I remember kind of walking through that, well, I don't think that's how that works, but so, I guess one of the questions I'd have is, can the hockey players today, more open-minded than maybe their actual parents are, or more open-minded than the elder statesmen in the room, the coaches and the management, or how do you see it?
Well, I'm going to start off with that first part. Okay.
Don't tell me that is how it works, because
Sorry, Trevor, you're sitting on stage with me now. You're gay. I'm sorry.
There we go. I knew it.
I grew up in hockey culture where everyone is presumed to be straight, especially in the men's side of the sport. If anything, I was indoctrinated into a culture where I was expected and adhered to being straight. And I wasn't. And it was hard. It harmed me. I knew I was gay when I was 6. First time I asked my parents, I was 6 years old. And I don't believe you can make somebody straight or gay or anything else. I think I was born gay. I just took a while to accept it for myself because the environment I was in told me I had to be straight. Going into any of those locker rooms, I'm not going to make anyone gay. What I'm hoping is that I will make people a little more aware of their behaviors and how it'll impact the person who's struggling. I would say players today are far more progressive in thought and in theory. They are exposed to so much more in society. So they're more open-minded to different people than themselves. It's not going to turn them gay, just like watching a murder TV show doesn't make you a serial killer. You're not going to watch a TV show or hear me talk and poof, you know, you're at Pride dancing and, you know, a drag queen all of a sudden. But what it might do is shift their language, because I would say as progressive as they are in theory, the language and behaviors in the culture and that safe space for them, that locker room space, haven't evolved as quickly. And we need to get to that. So are they more further along than their parents? Probably. Just because they've been exposed to more. They've grown up on social media where they've been exposed to people that are different than themselves. They've also, you know, kids are coming out a lot younger. So they're exposed in school in different places to queer folks. They're exposed to the trans community. They're exposed to so many different groups of people that they weren't exposed to. The previous generations, like when I was in high school, there was one gay kid. Nobody was trans. Nobody was, you know, identifying as anything other than cis and straight. Now you're seeing people actually be themselves, and we're seeing numbers. Like I was just speaking at a school board in Waterloo last week. 25% of the students in the Waterloo region, so Kitchener-Waterloo, identify as LGBTQ+. So kids today are exposed to it, which means it's becoming more normalized for them to engage with people different than themselves.
I remember in 2017 when you came here to do you're filming the documentary.
Yes.
You're from Ontario, and you actually had to come all the way to the East Coast to find a team that was willing to have you in their building. There's a lot of hockey teams you flew over on that flight from Toronto to St. John, New Brunswick that wouldn't have you. Why do you think it took you to have to come all the way to St. John, New Brunswick for a team to allow you into their space and to for them to be open to being on film?
So I think the locker room has still become one of these spaces that is incredibly, it's closeted. It's closeted in the sense that whatever happens in there, you're programmed from a very young age by your coaches and by management and different people in the sport that what's said and done in there stays in there, which is dangerous in my mind. Because if you're not doing anything that is problematic, what do you care? What do you care what comes out of that space? So I think, and I'm not saying everyone is doing problematic things, I think many have just conformed to the norm that that's how we act in hockey locker rooms. I think some people are maybe afraid of getting those phone calls that you got. I think some people are worried that the traditional hockey fan wouldn't be comfortable with it, which is sad. But because beyond the fact that, you know, I think most would be comfortable, they're missing out on a lot of people who could enjoy the game and be part of the game as fans, as potential players, as different groups. And on top of that, I think they would then have to hold themselves accountable for their behaviors. And it's uncomfortable. So it's tough for people to accept that they have to evolve. It's tough for people to recognize that maybe my language doesn't match my thoughts and that I need to evolve that. So it means that I go into the same teams annually.
Maybe some tougher questions, or maybe you can or can't answer it. And you don't have to name the team, but maybe the experience. One team, one organization, or one league, or that just absolutely shut the door on you. Not even naming the team, but what was the worst one where the door was slammed right on, or like no chance?
I went across the major junior league, and at the time I was told I could only do it basically on my own dime. And even at that point, the league wouldn't make it mandatory. All I was like, fine, I'll do it. Just mandate it. They wouldn't make it mandatory, and then about 7 or 8 of the teams wouldn't even engage. And that happens. That definitely does happen. Or, you know, you'll have people in the space who, even when you're there, aren't happy you're there, and I can feel it. You know, there's some that, like, maybe an owner or a GM or somebody is, or a coach is like, yeah, we want this, but then others in the space are not comfortable with it. And you know what? I can't control who wants to engage with LGBTQ plus and who doesn't. Like, that's I can't force that upon people. All I can do is share messages of the impact, humanize the issue, going back to the 3 tangible ways we can create shifts. Humanize the issue for them. And hopefully it resonates a little bit that, you know what, I could be impacting my friend, my colleague, my teammate, and then at that point maybe we'll start to see people recognize that they need to critically analyze and think and shift a little bit.
You've hopped on the ice with our guys, and you've talked to our guys, and I always find after your talks, I love to see it. All our players gather around Brock, want photos with you. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, you know, Bono just walked into the place after we talked. Everyone wants photos, and they all follow you on social media, and it's really so great. It's so great to see. So you have this real impact when you're in the locker room environment, talking to our players, and trying to make that shift, that you know, really focus on inclusivity in hockey and not conforming. Do you have a memorable moment or experience speaking to a group, speaking at a conference, you do this for a living, that someone coming from that audience or that group or a relative, whatever, where just kind of a special moment or a surprise that came from any of that?
My favorite is when I go into the locker room after I've shared my lived experience and whatnot, and I've gone through ways that we can all create shifts, whether it's LGBTQ plus or any other aspect of society. I'll do a breakout with the teams. I'll be like, okay, you tell me. They all use analogies like they're family or brothers or something like that. I'm like, but all you talk about are 4 things: women, partying, video games, and sports. And maybe music, as long as it's music that is socially acceptable within the norm. So I tell them, tell me something you wouldn't typically tell a teammate you enjoy. And some of those moments are the most incredible. I've had major junior players. I had a tough guy in the OHL stand up and say, I love writing poetry. Something I'd never heard in a hockey locker room in my life. I had another player on the team say, it was an NHL draft pick, he said, if I don't make the NHL, I'm going to be a zoologist. And a first-year Do you remember?
I remember.
Okay.
I don't want to remind me.
So the first time I came here, I was filming a documentary at the National Film Board. And it was early on in my speaking days and filming things, and I was a rookie and I didn't bring something on my carry-on to wear. So I literally got off the plane in sweatpants and a t-shirt and ran to, first thing I found was H&M, grabbed something to wear because I went in to speak to your team, and then I was like, okay, I need clothes, I'm filming for a week. So there was a menswear store in, yes, and the person working, is this older gentleman, and he's following me around, and I think he had the same clientele every, always. So he goes, what are you doing here? I said, oh, I'm working with the Sea Dogs and filming something. He goes, I'm like touched and shocked, and I have no idea what's going on. And he's like, I grew up in the East Coast, and he goes, I went to a university out here in the 80s. And he's like, the hockey team and the football team used to beat me up and tell me I was the reason for AIDS. He's like, thank you for what you're doing. You have no idea what it means to me. And that was arguably, in all the work I've done, the most touching moment I've ever had. And it happened here.
Wow. Here we are, Memorial Cup, first ever speaker series, One for All speaker series. We talked when we were putting our bid together. Brock actually wrote a letter for our bid and submitted it with our bid. I know for you, I know for us and everyone with the team and the committee, we had said whether we get the bid or not, we might want to host something like this anyways, because we want to tackle these issues head on and not hide from them or hide behind lawyers and communications experts and all that. Like, we want to address it head on. Like, let's make some real impact, and we can celebrate the past of hockey, but let's really talk about the future of hockey. We can do celebrating of the past all we want, but let's talk about the future of hockey. And for me, and for all of us here, I think this is the future of hockey, is having these discussions. Tonight, Luke Prokop, Edmonton Oil Kings, openly gay CHL player. Both you and him were on the Hockey News top 100 most influential people in hockey list this past year. So you think back, 2017, and 5 years later, you're sitting on stage here, you're in the top 100 most influential people in hockey, listed by the Hockey News. Pretty impressive, yeah? A player tonight, Luke Prokop, made that list as well. So that's pretty remarkable in a five-year window. Maybe talk about just the positives, that some of the real great strides that have been taken over the past few years, and maybe about your relationship with Luke.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, series like this matter. It's funny, I sat down for coffee one day with somebody from Hockey Canada, and I said, your messaging, or lack thereof, and lack of inclusion is why boys and men's hockey is declining annually in participation. You need to shift your culture, because people are going to go find sports where they feel comfortable and safe, or they're going to find other hobbies. And if we want to continue to grow the game and make it, like, hockey in my mind is the best sport in the world. I just love hockey. And I love that feeling when you go on the ice and nothing else matters for those 2 hours. But for some people, because what they hear and what's said to them and what happens in certain spaces, it's not that space for them. It's not a space where they go and nothing else matters because the same stuff is happening there. And we need to evolve that so it doesn't. And that's why things like this matter, because we need to have these conversations to grow the game and have it reflect society, you know, and the diversity of society, Canadian society. Tonight, Luke, I mean, Luke's special. Hockey aside, Luke's just a special kid. I had the privilege of talking with Luke, working with Luke prior to his coming out. I mean, Luke and I would talk almost every day for close to 2 months, and still talk at least once a week. And there's a bond there. There's a bond between us that, you know, I mean, it's so powerful what he did, and so unexpected from my perspective to, you know, like for the long time I was solo in a lot of this, and to see him out there, and also to see, talking with him and seeing how his game has evolved since he's come out, and how he's living as himself, and how he feels like a better hockey player from it, because he was walking around or skating around with, you know, 100-pound bricks on each shoulder. There's boulders on his shoulders, and now they're gone. Now he's free. Now he can be himself. And it makes a difference. And seeing the way, and speaking about youth today, his teammates have embraced him. You know, they've embraced all of it, from dating to other things. It's normalized for them to ask him about partners as it is to talk about, you know, women and girls. And I think when we get to that point in society, the world will be a better place. And I think when we get to that point in the sport, everyone can use it as an empowerment tool to feel good, to lift those boulders off their shoulders, and go on the ice for those 2 hours and with nothing else matter.
Well, we wish Luke all the best in his hockey career. Not tonight.
Not tonight, or semis, or finals.
Or semis or finals, but the rest of his hockey journey will be following and encouraging Luke.
We were joking because I was on the pregame show last night, and he was playing. That it was the gayest hockey game ever to be played. And
live on TSN, the gayest hockey game ever.
Gayest hockey game ever.
Live,
I'm convinced. And so then I texted him afterwards. I said, "Did you score for me?" And he said, "Absolutely not." I said, "That's really mean."
I so appreciate this. I mean, it's just nice getting to catch up and hang out. Yesterday, just at the rink and that. I get to talk to you quite a lot, so I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but I'd love to give the chance for folks here, if there's any questions from the audience, to feel free to ask a
I'm an
question.
open book, so...
Brock will literally answer anything.
Like, Trevor's like, "Is there anything I can't touch?" I said, "No."
No.
It's all out there.
You look young,
Thank
and I
you.
want to know how old you are, because in my head, oh, we've come so far and nobody is that negative anymore. So your story really hit me hard because you faced so much adversity. I can't believe that you were blacklisted in your community. I thought we didn't do things like that anymore. So I'm curious, when did this happen? Like, in what time frame?
So first, I think she had to go, but Julia from TSN was here a few minutes ago, and she actually exposed my age on air last night. And I told her, I said, I told her on air, I said, "Did you really just do that?" So when I'm done, when we finally get to a point that we eradicate homophobia in the sport, my next goal is to get hockey players to get on proper skincare regimens and routines. I think it really matters, and it's a very critical issue that we need to tackle. I'm 38, so I'm youngish, but old enough. It's, I mean, a lot of that stuff happened in 2016, 2015, 2016, so it wasn't that long ago, and I still have stories of kids coming to me today that are struggling. I keynoted a couple of years ago the All-Ontario U18 Championships, and a kid came to me there, and that was that was struggling with the locker room culture, with his team, with just accepting himself, and that was 2018. I've had players come to me that I worked with, and they didn't believe me that there was still a long way to go in terms of these issues because I was around them. Their teams had evolved and shifted because they knew me. I'd humanized the issue for them. But I had a kid come to me that was playing junior, and his pregame huddle, and you might want to bleep this on the cameras, was, "Let's kill these faggots." In 2019. So this stuff still, and coaches heard it. It was every game. And this is still real and exists and needs to evolve. Like, I couldn't imagine being part of the LGBTQ plus community and in that space. You know what I mean? And we still have a long way to go in those spaces. We do a lot of incredible things like Pride Nights and visibility for fans and for inclusion of potential fans and whatnot, but that locker room space, we're in the 1960s. In most. I mean, there's progressive folks like Trevor who ensure that their locker rooms aren't like that, but the generalized locker room setting is still far behind society is.
This is great. Thank you so much. Questions. We talk a lot about the hockey locker room. From your perspective, do you see the same in other sports, whether it's basketball, football, or some better than others? Is hockey predominantly the issue? What's your perspective?
So I've talked to a lot of media members about this, especially ones that cover multi-sport, to get their impression. And I think men's team sport culture as a whole has that hypermasculinity to it that you know, leads to some toxic traits. I'm not saying masculinity is a bad thing. I'm saying like that toxic masculinity needs to evolve. From everyone I've talked to in terms of the language that cover multi-sports, even at professional levels, baseball and hockey are the two worst. I have a theory on it that's not been proven, but growing up in most sports, you play at school. And if you're playing in school, you might have a travel team on the weekend or tournament teams and whatnot. But in school, the boys and girls teams, men's and women's teams share spaces. So you're automatically getting diversity in terms of gender. The basketball, soccer, football, baseball team, like all the different teams may share a locker room. So you're getting diversity in terms of just things people enjoy, maybe race, different aspects. There's still, at school, there's still groups that, like there's GSAs and there's academics who are there who are staying for different things. So you're exposed to so many different people, plus different socioeconomics in a school, right? Hockey, from a very young age, we're isolated and we're broken up by skill level and age. And we're stuck in a locker room with solely our teammates who are our peers 6 nights a week from the age of 7 years old. And we're influenced by coaches who grew up in that same culture. And there's no teachers on staff or anything else, or if they are teachers, it's not a part of their work. So there's, you know, different ramifications for what will happen in that space. So 95% of the room is white. Everyone's assumed to be straight, and it's predominantly middle to upper class. That enables, not that they're bad people, because I think 98% of hockey folks are really good folks, and they'll rally around issues when they realize they exist. But because of that insularity of it, we get situations where they can say or do whatever they want, and they don't even think they're hurting anyone. So I think that is part of the problem in hockey culture.
So I know that coming out publicly is pretty rare still, but I wonder if you have any sense of whether it's becoming more common for people to come out to their teammates and that be kind of kept internally.
I think there's definitely a couple players that maybe, you know, their teammates know, whether they came out to them or people just get wind of things they know, but I think there's still such a fear that it'll impact their careers that so many still don't. They hide it. I mean, I know of NHL players who are dating women who are gay. And like I said earlier, the Waterloo Regional School Board was saying 24 to 25% of their students are LGBTQ+, which aligns with newer studies in the United States that are showing that's with some states, at least like less progressive states, showing like 3% of their population is LGBTQ+, versus states like New York that may be a lot higher. So based off percentages alone, very few come out as compared to who probably are LGBTQ+ in hockey. But there's people that are, people know, it's just not talked about.
Yeah, I just had a question. Brock, you're speaking with all the teams and that, but however, do you go to visit any of the elementary schools or high schools?
That's where my passion lies, actually. Last week alone, I went to 5 schools. And what's fascinating about those spaces is I get to speak to the stray kids who may be the hockey players or the influencers of the school and engage in shifting, but I also get the kids who are LGBTQ+ that are either out and being bullied or who are closeted and struggling, and I get to talk to them. And most of the time, those kids come to me later on social media. And I really get to engage with them, work with them, try and find resources in their area for them, be an ear or a shoulder, and in some cases even talk to their parents and try and find them the help and support they need, and maybe even shift their parents' thoughts or behaviors.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do the parents, do you ever engage or have the opportunity to engage with the parents, or do they come to any of those talks?
They don't typically come to the schools, but I get to at least reach out afterwards. It's mostly when I have kids coming to me who are self-harming, or I think, you know, based off what they are saying to me, are at huge risk. At that point, I'm like, okay, this needs to like move beyond Instagram, and you know, in order to do so, I need to talk to your parents.
Yeah.
And so I've done that a number of times. I've driven to communities, just sit down with parents and have frank conversations with them. And I've seen shifts in parents when that's happened. And you know, I had one parent who was telling Trevor a story of a parent who said to me, "But Brock, look, like I've seen text messages, my son texts with girls," and I'm like, "Yeah, so did I. I'm gay." And he's like, "Oh." I'm like, "But ultimately, do you really care who your son is dating if it means that he's gone from being a 95 average student to writing his name on tests and being like a shell of himself, and he's self-harming and everything else?" I said, "Does that really matter to you, or do you care about him living?" He's like, "Yeah, I want him to live. I want him to be happy." I said, "Then you need to change, not your kid." And I'll work with them on that, and you know, there'll be conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable for them, or that are frank, but need to happen, and ultimately we get to a point that they recognize, and for the most part. And sometimes I've had interesting ones. I spoke to a school board with teachers, and a teacher came to me at the end and said, "Brock, that was really great." She's like, "My son just came out, he's in his 40s, and I tell him I love him, but he's going to hell." And I went, "Oh, that's a new one." I said, "Well," I said, and fortunately I grew up in Catholic school, so I had enough knowledge that I could have this conversation with her, and I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I don't know about you, but everything I learned, the first thing I learned was he without sin cast the first stone, and we're all born sinners. Would you agree? And she said, yeah. I said, so why are you judging your son? I said, the other thing I learned is that allegedly when we die, we go and God will tell us if we're going to heaven or not. I said, would you agree? She said, yeah. I said, so are you God? She went, what? I said, well, you're telling your son he's going to hell, or why are you doing God's job? And she went, I never thought about that. And I said, well, maybe you should focus on loving your child and let your, higher being do their job. And she said, yeah, you're right. So it's really interesting engaging with parents and at different ages, about these things, because there's some unique perspectives out there. But yeah, I do love the schools. I think that's my passion lies there.
Any other questions for Brock? Yeah.
First of all, thanks for doing this. This is great.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier a conversation with someone from Hockey Canada, and you were asking them to mandate some certifications or something like that. Has there been any progress with that? Like, I've done a lot of coaching in the past, and I know, we have to take a safety course and a speak out course, and now parents have to attend something or do something online. Has there been any progress to work in some of these messages?
So the Ontario Hockey Federation got sued a few years ago, and they had to mandate there's a 3 to 5 minute video on pronouns and trans related issues. And what they've decided is that the coaches will watch it and then deliver it to players, which I think is incredibly dangerous. If people aren't inclusive and then they're forced to deliver messages, the way they deliver it, their influencers for the youth, could make it even more harmful for kids in those locker rooms. There isn't a lot. They enjoy their modules and their videos, and to me, that is I've sat down with Tom Rennie and I flat out told him, I said I had to take all those certifications and I muted them, watched a movie and answered the questions at the end. I said, if you're not getting me to engage, how are you getting people that aren't passionate about these things to engage? And there was no answer really given, and that's what I believe in humanizing. I believe because of the insularity of this culture, you need people with the lived experience within it to go in and share messages, whether it's town hall format or go directly into each individual locker room. And I've offered it to them. I've offered to go around. I would love to. I think, I want to do it across the CHL. That to me, that is the intersection point of where I would say this level has the most influence in the entire hockey culture across Canada, because they're in every community across Canada, and they're accessible. They're accessible to their peers at school. They're treated like stars from adults and youth alike, but they're everywhere. They're like Instagram influencers or YouTubers where they're in every community. Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, that's Brad Pitt. They're not accessible to anyone. But major junior players are, and they carry so much influence. The way they talk, the way they dress, the way they act is copied in society. I hope we get there one day. It's slow moving. It's incredibly slow moving, and incremental steps. Champions like Trevor, and I'm not just saying that because he's sitting here with me, but he's genuinely, I even told him last night, I said, you've been such an incredible champion of what I do. And I'm so grateful for it. I mean, even being here right now, I've been out for 6 years now. This is the first time I've been on a Memorial Cup, as an ex-player in major junior hockey and doing the work I do. So the more champions we have like that, the sooner it'll happen. And I think we're starting to see more and more. It's slow moving, and it will be.
Great answer.
Do we have any other Final questions before we... Well, I want to say thank you very much for being here. Thanks, Trevor, for moderating. And as we said, we certainly wanted to have a theme of our event be one that includes everybody, and appreciate you coming. Glad this is your first Memorial Cup, and hopefully you've been enjoying it.
It's been great. I love coming here so much. It's the environment, the people, it's so wonderful. It's always a good time in St. John. But if people do have questions, or you know somebody who's struggling or needs resources or help or support, my social media handles are up there, and feel free to reach out or have them reach out at any point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.